Think the high seas are a lawless zone. Think again. Beyond the shore lies a bizarre legal world where radio pirates, ghost ships, and even NASA rockets are governed by ancient, absurd, and mind-bending rules. We're setting sail to uncover the 50 strangest laws of the ocean, a place where the legal loopholes are as deep as the Mariana Trench. 1. Let's torpedo your romantic bubble immediately. Ship captains generally cannot perform legally binding marriages. Despite countless Hollywood films and TV shows depicting a charming skipper marrying a young couple on deck, it's mostly a myth. Unless that captain also happens to be a registered judge, an ordained minister, or holds a specific license from a country like Bermuda, your nautical nuptials are legally worthless. So, if you got hitched by a guy in a captain's hat on international waters, you might want to double-check if you're actually still single right now. 2. Interfering with the mail is a federal crime on land, and apparently, the vastness of the ocean doesn't change that one bit. Under older maritime statutes, ships were often legally obligated to carry mail if requested by a postal authority. Refusing to take it, or worse, intentionally delaying it, could result in massive fines. It was a relic from an age when ships were the planet's primary data cables. It didn't matter if you were hunting for treasure or fleeing a kraken. The postman's creed applied to you too. 3. If a piece of a NASA spacecraft crashes into the ocean near your boat, do not touch it. International law, specifically the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, declares that any object launched into space remains the property of the launching nation, no matter where it lands. You can't legally salvage a satellite for scrap metal, and you certainly can't mount a discarded booster rocket on your yacht, no matter how much it would improve your trolling speeds. 4. The moment you step onto a ship, you are legally standing on the soil of the country whose flag flies above the mast. This is the law of the flag. If you are on a Panamanian-flagged vessel in the middle of the Pacific, you are subject to Panama's laws, not your own. This leads to the phenomenon of flags of convenience, where ship owners register in countries with loose labor laws, minimal safety oversight, and practically zero taxes. Does knowing your cruise ship is technically a floating piece of a tax haven make the all-you-can-eat buffet taste better or worse? 5. Broadcasting unauthorized radio signals from international waters is a very serious offense. In the 1960s, pirate radio stations anchored just outside British territorial waters to blast the rebellious sounds of rock and roll that the straight-laced BBC wouldn't touch. The government, in a fit of bureaucratic rage, eventually passed the Marine Broadcasting Offenses Act, effectively making it illegal for anyone to supply, advertise on, or even interview on these floating jukeboxes, killing the counterculture vibe with extreme prejudice. 6. If an American murders a French citizen on a Liberian-flagged ship in international waters, who prosecutes the crime? This isn't a riddle, it's a jurisdictional nightmare. Usually, the flag state, Liberia in this case, has primary jurisdiction. But what if Liberia doesn't care or lacks the resources? The killer might just walk free until they dock in a country willing to take the case. It's a terrifying legal gray area where justice can evaporate. Seriously, if you knew you could get away with a crime by being on the right boat, would you feel safe on the high seas? 7. In the United Kingdom, all whales are technically royal fish. A statute from the reign of King Edward II in 1324, yes, the 14th century, states that whales and sturgeons caught near the coast belong to the monarch. While King Charles probably doesn't want a 40-ton whale carcass delivered to Buckingham Palace, the law technically remains on the books. So, if you happen to reel in Moby Dick off the coast of Dover, you are technically stealing from the king. 8. You can't just unceremoniously dump a body overboard and call it a burial at sea. Under US law, for instance, the body must be properly weighted to ensure it sinks rapidly and permanently. The disposal must also occur at least 3 nautical miles from land and at a depth of at least 600 feet. Furthermore, you have to report the exact latitude and longitude of the disposal to the Environmental Protection Agency. If you don't, you aren't a mournful undertaker. You're just illegally littering with a corpse. 9. Finders keepers is a complete lie, especially when it comes to shipwrecks. Maritime salvage law is incredibly complex. If you discover an abandoned ship, you don't automatically own it. Instead, you are entitled to a salvage award, which is a percentage of the vessel's value, paid by the owner. However, you must prove you saved the ship from genuine peril, like sinking in a storm. If you just hop on a perfectly fine boat that was merely adrift and claim it, that's not salvage, it's piracy. And navies really frown on that. 10. For years, hovercrafts caused a massive legal headache because nobody could decide if they were ships or planes. They float on the water, but they also fly on a cushion of air. For a long time, maritime lawyers argued over whether admiralty law or aviation law applied to them. Eventually, authorities created specific codes for high-speed craft, but for a while, a hovercraft was the legal equivalent of a platypus, a bizarre, unclassifiable anomaly that gave regulators and insurance companies a collective migraine. 11. On most cruise ships, the casino is a ghost town while docked. Then, as soon as the ship sails a specific distance from shore, usually 3 to 12 miles depending on the country, the slot machines light up and the roulette wheels start spinning. This is because gambling laws are aggressively territorial. The moment a ship enters international waters, it crosses an invisible legal tripwire, transforming from a family-friendly resort into a floating slice of Las Vegas, only to shut down again the second it gets too close to land. It's a rule that turns geography into a literal on-off switch for vice. 12. The law of hot pursuit sounds like something from a spy movie, because it is. If a Coast Guard vessel spots a ship breaking the law in its territorial waters, it can legally chase that ship out onto the high seas. The chase is only legal if it's uninterrupted, meaning you can't stop for lunch and then resume the pursuit. This rule effectively extends a nation's police power into the lawless ocean, but only if they're fast enough. 13. One of the greatest deceptions in naval history was hidden behind maritime salvage law. In 1974, the CIA secretly used a ship called the Glomar Explorer, pretending to be a deep-sea mining vessel, to recover a sunken Soviet submarine from the bottom of the Pacific. They claimed they were legally mining for manganese nodules under international law. In reality, Project Azorian was a multi-million-dollar covert operation to steal nuclear missiles and codebooks. It was a brilliant rule bend, using the obscure laws of seabed mining as the perfect cover story for a massive act of Cold War espionage. 14. A fundamental rule of the sea is innocent passage. This allows a ship from one country to pass through the territorial waters of another, as long as it doesn't stop fish or do anything threatening. This creates the utterly bizarre but common spectacle of a fully armed foreign warship sailing just a few miles off a nation's coast, legally required to just smile and wave. It's the maritime equivalent of letting your heavily armed neighbor take a shortcut through your backyard, as long as he promises not to aim his rocket launcher at your house. 15. The ocean has its own bizarre legal vocabulary for lost property. Stuff found floating is flotsam. Goods deliberately thrown overboard to save a sinking ship are jetsam. And cargo that was thrown overboard with a buoy attached so it could be found later is lagan. These aren't just sailor slang. They are distinct legal terms that determine who gets to claim ownership of ocean junk. It's a rule that proves lawyers can create 3 categories for literally anything. 16. After the catastrophic 1989 Exxon Valdez oil spill, the United States passed a law forcing all new oil tankers to be built with a double hull. It's essentially a ship with a second internal skin to prevent leaks if the outer layer is punctured. While it's a life-saving environmental rule, the truly wild part is that it wasn't already standard practice. It took one of the worst environmental disasters in history to make a rule that basically amounts to, maybe the boat carrying millions of gallons of toxic sludge should be a little extra thick. What other obvious safety rule do you think is being ignored right now? 17. In 1967, a British man named Paddy Roy Bates occupied a decommissioned World War II sea fort in international waters and declared it the independent Principality of Sealand. He designed a flag, wrote a constitution, and started issuing passports. When the British Royal Navy tried to evict him, he fired warning shots, and a British court later ruled that they had no jurisdiction over him. Sealand isn't recognized by any major government, but it still exists today, a tiny, rusting monument to the idea that if you go far enough out to sea, you can just make up your own country. 18. Flag etiquette is taken with deadly seriousness at sea. The flag of the country you're visiting, the courtesy flag, must be flown, and it must be in a subordinate position to your own vessel's national flag. Flying another nation's flag upside down is a universal distress signal, but it's also a grave insult if done by mistake. It's a whole complex, nonverbal language where a simple piece of cloth can communicate respect, emergency, or start an international incident, all depending on which rope you hang it from. 19. The modern world runs on a network of submarine cables carrying nearly all our internet data. There is a very strict international law making it illegal to damage them. This means you can get arrested and face huge fines for dropping your anchor in the wrong place and accidentally unplugging a country. Could you imagine being the one person who cuts off Netflix for all of Europe because you wanted to fish? 20. The law of prize is an ancient but very real set of rules governing the capture of an enemy ship during wartime. When a naval vessel captured a merchant ship, it wasn't a free-for-all looting spree. The captured ship and its cargo had to be taken to a prize court, where a judge would formally condemn it as a legitimate prize of war. Only then could the value be calculated and distributed among the victorious crew according to a rigid formula. It was the world's most violent state-sanctioned business, complete with its own legal system and paperwork. 21. 5 short, rapid blasts from a ship's horn isn't a celebratory sound. It's the international maritime signal for "I don't understand your intentions," which is the polite, legally codified way of screaming, "What on earth are you doing, you absolute moron?" You're about to cause a catastrophic collision. It's a universally recognized auditory panic button. The rule essentially weaponizes a horn to express extreme confusion and imminent danger, letting every other vessel in the area know that one captain has officially lost faith in another's competence. 22. After the Titanic sank, the world's maritime nations created a powerful rule to prevent it from ever happening again. They formed the International Ice Patrol, operated by the U.S. Coast Guard but funded by multiple countries. Their sole job is to find, track, and report icebergs drifting into the busy shipping lanes of the North Atlantic. They are legally mandated to find these giant, ship-killing chunks of ice and draw a limit of all known ice on nautical charts. It's a rule that created a permanent, international neighborhood watch program for frozen water, all because of one famously doomed voyage. 23. Baratry is a real and wonderfully archaic-sounding maritime crime. It's when the captain or crew of a ship knowingly and willfully commits an act that financially harms the vessel or its cargo, directly against the owner's interests. This could mean stealing cargo, setting the ship on fire, or deliberately sinking it to collect the insurance money. It's a specific legal rule for the unique betrayal that happens when the people you trusted with your multi-million-dollar floating asset decide to turn it into a fraudulent submarine for personal gain. 24. You can't just build your own island and claim it as new national territory. According to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, artificial islands and installations do not possess the legal status of natural islands. They have no territorial sea of their own, and their presence does not affect the official boundaries of a nation's waters. It's a rule specifically designed to stop countries from just pouring a bunch of sand in the ocean to creep their borders outward. But does a rule on paper actually stop a nation that's determined to do it anyway? 25. A ship found abandoned and adrift at sea is legally known as a derelict. This is distinct from a wreck, which has sunk or run aground. A derelict is a true ghost ship, posing a massive legal and physical hazard to navigation. According to salvage law, Anyone who takes control of a derelict and brings it safely to port is entitled to an extremely generous salvage award, sometimes even the entire value of the vessel and its cargo. It's a rule that makes finding a floating, empty ship the maritime equivalent of stumbling upon a winning lottery ticket bobbing in the waves. 26. Modern maritime law includes a powerful system called port state control. This is a rule that gives a country the right to inspect foreign-flagged ships that are docked in its ports to ensure they comply with international safety, labor, and environmental standards. It's the surprise pop quiz of the global shipping industry. A captain can sail halfway around the planet only to be told by a stone-faced inspector in Rotterdam that his fire extinguishers are out of date, and his billion-dollar ship is not allowed to leave until they're fixed. 27. For nearly a century, a powerful unwritten rule governed the North Atlantic, the battle for the Blue Riband. This was an imaginary trophy awarded to the passenger liner with the fastest average speed on a transatlantic crossing. There was no prize money, just immense prestige and bragging rights. Yet shipping companies spent the modern equivalent of billions of dollars building faster, less fuel-efficient, and sometimes more dangerous ships just to claim it. It was a rule driven by nothing more than pure, unrestrained corporate ego, pushing technology to its limits for a prize that didn't physically exist. 28. In the 19th century, international law evolved to fight the slave trade by legally redefining it as an act of piracy. This was a critical and incredibly clever legal maneuver. By labeling slave ships as pirates, the law stripped them of the protection of their national flag and made them enemies of all mankind. This gave the navies of nations like Great Britain the authority to stop, board, and seize ships from any country engaging in the trade, even in international waters where they would otherwise have no jurisdiction. It was a rule that weaponized the universal hatred of pirates to dismantle a far greater and more monstrous evil. 29. A ship's captain can be legally absolved of responsibility for losing cargo if it was due to an act of God. But this creates a massive legal battlefield for insurance companies. If a ship sinks in a predictable seasonal hurricane, is that an act of God, or was the captain negligent for sailing into it? Maritime courts have spent centuries arguing over this rule, trying to draw a legal line between a truly unforeseeable event, like a freak rogue wave, and just plain bad decision-making. Where do you think that line should be when millions of dollars are at stake? 30. Between a nation's territorial waters, extending 12 nautical miles from the coast, and the high seas, there's a weird legal buffer zone called the contiguous zone, which extends another 12 miles out. In this specific strip of water, a country doesn't have full sovereignty, but it does have the right to enforce its national laws related to customs, immigration, sanitation, and taxation. It's a rule that creates a sort of legal front porch on the ocean, where you can board a vessel and make arrests for things that happened in your territory, even though they've already made a run for it. 31. Every large ship that crosses an ocean is legally required to manage its ballast water. This is the water pumped into tanks to keep the ship stable. The problem is, when you take on water in Shanghai, you're also sucking up millions of local microscopic organisms. If you then empty that tank in Los Angeles, you've just introduced an invasive species. Modern rules now require complex onboard treatment systems or mid-ocean exchanges, all to stop ships from being unintentional Trojan horses of ecological destruction, smuggling tiny biological stowaways across the globe. 32. For decades, naval powers have exploited a natural phenomenon in the ocean called the SOFAR channel, or deep sound channel. It's a layer of water where temperature and pressure conditions allow low-frequency sound to travel for thousands of miles. During the Cold War, the U.S. Navy set up a secret underwater microphone system to listen for Soviet submarines using this channel. This created an unwritten but fiercely protected rule. This acoustic highway was military territory. Using it for unauthorized purposes was like trying to have a private conversation on a party line monitored by the Pentagon. 33. A ship's captain can be a master mariner with decades of experience, but under the rule of compulsory pilotage, They are legally required to hand over navigational control of their own vessel to a local harbor pilot when entering or leaving a port. This pilot is a local expert who knows the specific currents and hazards. But it creates the bizarre power dynamic where the ship's all-powerful commander must stand aside and trust a total stranger not to crash their billion-dollar vessel. It's the ultimate legally mandated case of backseat driving. 34. Commercial fishing is governed by strict quotas to prevent overfishing. While this sounds smart, it created one of the dumbest and most wasteful rules at sea: the law of discards. If a fisherman catches a species they don't have a quota for, or fish that are too small, they are legally required to throw them back into the ocean. The tragic part is, these fish are usually already dead from being hauled up in the nets. The rule forced fishermen to dump millions of tons of perfectly good dead seafood back into the sea simply to comply with paperwork. 35. There's an obscure and terrifying rule of international law called the right of angry. It gives a nation at war the legal right to seize and use neutral, foreign-flagged ships that happen to be in its ports, if it's a matter of urgent public necessity. They have to pay compensation, but they can still take your property. Imagine you're a neutral Danish cargo captain and you dock in Britain during a major war. The government can just walk on board and say, "Thanks for the ship, we're borrowing it for the war effort. Here's an IOU." 36. While ships are valuable, their crews can sometimes be treated as disposable. There's a growing crisis of crew abandonment, where a shipping company goes bankrupt and simply stops paying the crew, leaving them stranded on a ship in a foreign port for months or even years. Maritime law is notoriously slow to help, trapping sailors in a legal limbo where they can't get paid, can't go home, and often lack food and water. What should the penalty be for a company that just leaves its employees adrift? 37. Where do giant ships go to die? They follow the informal rules of the shipbreaking yards in places like Alang, India. Here, massive tankers and cruise liners are intentionally run aground on a beach at high tide. Then, thousands of workers swarm them, taking them apart piece by piece with basic tools. While technically governed by international waste disposal laws, these places operate under their own brutal set of rules, creating a surreal, apocalyptic landscape where the titans of the sea are dismantled on a sandy shore. 38. The next great legal frontier is autonomous shipping. As companies develop massive cargo ships with no crew on board, they're creating a legal black hole. If a ghost ship guided by an AI in an office building 1,000 miles away causes a collision, who is legally the captain? Who is at fault? Is it the AI, the programmer who coded it, or the person who was supposed to be monitoring it? We are building ships that are moving faster than the laws designed to govern them. 39. The international date line is not a straight line for a reason. It's a man-made rule that zigs and zags violently across the Pacific Ocean for purely political and economic reasons. It swerves around island nations like Kiribati to ensure the entire country is on the same day. It's a perfect visual example of how human laws and agreements are imposed onto the natural world. The planet doesn't care what day it is, but we've drawn a giant squiggly fence down the middle of the ocean to make sure we all agree. 40. One of the most powerful and humane principles of maritime law is the right of force majeure, or safe haven. This ancient rule states that a vessel in distress, whether from a storm, mechanical failure, or medical emergency, has the right to seek refuge in the nearest port regardless of the ship's nationality or any existing political tensions. It's a law that recognizes that, at a certain point, the preservation of human life at sea overrides all other rules, from trade embargoes to outright war. 41. Every major port now has fences and security checkpoints, and every large ship must have a designated ship security officer and a detailed security plan. This rule created a mountain of paperwork and a culture of constant, often theatrical security drills, turning the once open seas into a world of locked gates and mandatory ID badges. 42. You can't just throw your garbage overboard anymore. Under the International Marpol Convention, ships must follow incredibly strict rules for waste disposal. All garbage has to be sorted into specific categories like plastics, food waste, and cooking oil. Even more absurd, every single bag of garbage that is incinerated or disposed of must be meticulously recorded in an official garbage record book, signed by the captain. It's a rule that forces the commander of a billion-dollar supertanker to spend time doing paperwork about a bag of potato peels. 43. The ocean has a noise pollution problem, and it's creating new, informal rules. The constant hum of ship engines, the explosive blasts of seismic surveys for oil, and the high-intensity pings of military sonar are blinding animals like whales and dolphins that rely on sound to navigate and survive. This has led to new regulations in many areas that force ships to slow down or reroute to create quiet zones. It's a rule born from the realization that our industrial noise is accidentally deafening an entire ecosystem. 44. For decades after the invention of the steam engine, a fundamental rule of the road at sea was that a steam-powered vessel was always required to give way to a sailing vessel. The logic was that the steamship had greater maneuverability. This created the wonderfully ironic situation where a massive, powerful, coal-belching iron ship had to legally swerve to avoid a comparatively tiny wooden boat being pushed by the wind. It was a rule that forced new technology to bow before the old. 45. One of the strangest fictions in maritime law is that a ship is legally a person. Under a principle known as in rem jurisdiction, you can sue the ship itself, not its owner. The lawsuit is literally filed against the vessel MV Oceanic Voyager. If the case proceeds, a court can order the ship to be arrested, which involves a U.S. Marshal physically nailing the legal notice to its mast. It's a rule that allows you to take a 100,000-ton steel object to court as if it were a person who owes you money. 46. The submarine service is governed by a set of unwritten but unbreakable rules known as the Code of the Silent Service. One of the most solemn is the treatment of lost submarines. They are never considered wrecks to be salvaged. Instead, they are designated as being on eternal patrol. They are treated as war graves, and their locations are kept secret to protect them from disturbance. It's a powerful rule of respect, ensuring that the sailors who never returned home remain resting in peace in the deep. 47. Thanks to a rule mandating the Automatic Identification System, or AIS, the idea of disappearing on the high seas is almost a thing of the past. Every large commercial vessel is legally required to broadcast a constant stream of data, including its name, position, course, and speed. This has turned the entire ocean into a publicly viewable GPS map. Anyone with an app on their phone can now track a supertanker in real time as it crosses the Pacific, ending centuries of maritime anonymity. 48. Marine insurance, one of the oldest forms of commerce, operates on a brutally strict rule called the warranty of seaworthiness. A ship owner warrants that the vessel is fit for the voyage in every respect when it leaves port. If it's later discovered that the ship was unseaworthy in some way, even a minor defect that had nothing to do with the eventual sinking, the insurance company can legally void the entire policy and refuse to pay. It's a rule with a hidden hair trigger that can bankrupt a company over a single, overlooked flaw. 49. The rules of quarantine at sea can be terrifyingly absolute. If a ship is under a quarantine order, nobody is allowed on or off. During the bubonic plague outbreak in Honolulu in 1899, the ship Nippon Maru arrived with several sick passengers. The vessel was forced to anchor under armed guard, and no one was allowed ashore. When a crew member tried to swim for it, he was shot and killed by harbor police. It was a grim demonstration of a rule where the fear of disease turns a ship into an inescapable floating prison. All right, we've navigated through 49 points and only the final one remains. But before we get to number 50, it's time for the final verdict. In our opinion, the award for the most mind-blowingly counterproductive rule from today's list goes to the law of discards. Simply because it was a rule created with the noble goal of conservation. But in practice, it forced fishermen to throw millions of tons of perfectly good dead fish back into the ocean to comply with bureaucratic quotas. It's a special kind of insanity. Do you agree with our verdict? Or did another point deserve this dubious honor? Let us know your pick in the comments. And now, our final number. 50. The single most important, most powerful, and most humane rule of the sea is the absolute duty to rescue. Under the International Lawless Convention, the master of a ship, upon receiving a distress signal from any source, is legally and morally bound to proceed with all speed to the assistance of the persons in distress. This rule cuts through politics, war, profit, and flags. It doesn't matter who you are or where you're from. If you are in peril on the sea, the next ship that comes along is required to save you. It's the ultimate law, a moral compass for the entire ocean that defines the very soul of being a mariner. The high seas are a chaotic mix of ancient traditions and modern madness. We've seen that human attempts to tame the ocean are often as wild as the waves themselves. Be honest, after hearing all this legal insanity, would you actually want to be a ship captain? Or are you staying safely on dry land? Let us know in the comments. If you want more stories from the edge of the map, hit subscribe. We're just getting started.